everybody. I hope you've been having a lovely time with this fantastic break in temperatures. If you're on the East Coast, we've just come through this crazy week where you feel like you've been transported to the north of Maine and you might have to throw on a blanket at night. It's over, of course, but wow, what fun it was. And speaking of fall, I have a great conversation coming up with Heather Andrews of Garden Thoughtfully. She's a pollinator gardener, designer, and speaker that I ran into at a speaking event that we did together last fall. And she and I talk about her gig and all things good for the earth. And we wrap up with what you can do this fall to make it easier for bugs and birds to go on their merry way as they migrate. Welcome back. I am chatting with Heather Andrews, who I met last year at the Western North Carolina Master Gardeners Symposium. And we were down outside of Asheville in this really cute town. It wasn't Asheville, but it was, do you remember the name of the town?
I am blanking.
Me too. Yeah. Super cute town. Just trust us. South of Asheville. And we both had a great time speaking, and we met each other there. And ironically, my go-to talk that I do when I do speaking is called Thoughtful Gardening. And the name of Heather's whole shtick is Garden Thoughtfully. So we're just really thinking, we're so thinking about gardens. Yes. And we're thinking about other things besides plants. We're also thinking about the earth a little bit and pollinators and sustainability and habitat and all that sort of thing, but not to the expense of having a beautiful garden ever. So Heather, welcome. It's so nice to see you again and talk to you.
Good to see you too. And I just remembered it was Hendersonville, which was adorable. Probably one of the best meals I've ever had in my life. We ended up going back there, I think, 2 or 3 times. So,
and we were with Linda Vada, right?
Yes, Linda Vada.
She's such a live wire.
Sprigley's
blog. Yeah. Who else was there? Who was
Sprigley's? He is a pollinator designer. So it was a really interesting. We obviously all of us didn't know each other, but our talks kind of went together, which was really kind of cool because we ended up having a speaker who was out with COVID and got a last minute panel, if you remember. And so it was really fun to kind of just feed off.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Linda had to leave at that stage, but you and I were sitting up there and pretending, you were not pretending, I was pretending, they were asking questions, but it wasn't just a matter of who's the expert on this. It's like, what experience do you have with this particular thing? And that was a really fun part of it, where there were live questions from the audience.
It was a good audience, and it was fun to feed off them. And then it was really great because we would just pass the baton, so to speak, to who could answer the question.
It was good. And it was also, instead of a straight on answer, sometimes it was just an anecdote and experience with that particular situation. People have asked me why I don't do live question and answer on the podcast. And I've always been scared to death, but that wasn't scary. I think you gave me confidence on that day.
No, it's definitely not scary. The only thing that gets a little scary when I've done Q&As for meetings is just when people go like way off the reservation, meaning that it's just like completely not in your scope whatsoever, and they're just off on a completely topic. So hopefully you have a moderator there to like pull them back in to make sure that the question's appropriate and in your scope. And I've learned to say I have no idea, because gardening is a very giant pie, as you know.
It's a giant pie. So we've talked about that, but we really haven't talked about you enough. And instead of me introducing you, could you tell my listeners something about yourself and how you got started and what you do and all that sort of thing?
So it's ironic. My talk was lessons from my grandfather. So I became a pollinator gardener quite by accident. Growing up as 12 grandchildren in North Carolina, my granddaddy Andrews always had a very large vegetable garden. This time of year, we would eat out of that garden. But he used to tell me that the years that his honeybees did well, his garden did well. So we would take long walks in that garden and pick what was for dinner. And I had filed that information away in my little brain when I moved to the Arctic Northeast here in Pennsylvania, where our summer's about 5 minutes long. It was really helpful to figure out how I was going to juice the garden. So that particular year, and most years, our last frost is mid-May. So things like tomatoes and peppers, like you have to wait for the soil to warm up, even though that's your last frost. And it became apparent to me that I needed to put in plants that would get those bees, like my grandfather's garden. And so I started planting just intuitively a lot of herbs in the garden. And then it was really the master gardeners of Perry County who insisted that I plant weeds. And I thought they were crazy. But I was a little intimidated because they were like, you have to do this. And I said, okay. And I planted 2 swamp milkweeds that year, and the monarchs ate them to the ground. And I was completely
Wow.
hooked at that point. I was like, this is the coolest thing. Clearly, it's like those famous potato chips. You can't just have one milkweed. You need lots of milkweed if you're a monarch gardener. And so that's their host plant. So just like your grandchild or your 3-year-old who only eats chicken fingers, monarchs only eat milkweed. And so you need a lot of it to get the mama monarchs to come and lay in your yard. So it really started off with a vegetable garden. And that year I had this huge bumper crop. So I attributed that to the fact that the pollinators did all the work that year. And I was telling my neighbors, if you don't get over here, I'm going to reverse ding dong ditch you and leave vegetables on your doorstep, run away. And then I just got obsessed with making the pollinator garden bigger. This is obviously during pandemic. So I entered it into the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society garden. They have every year awards for businesses and community organizations and personal gardens. And I got a award of distinction, which I thought was amazing. Um, so at the same time, my job sort of paused. I'm in the medical device field. And so a lot of those trials that I work on just sort of came to a screeching halt. So my boss at the time was incredibly nice. I went and took a professional speaking course, and I got my master gardener certification at the exact same time. And so I have been doing pollinator gardens and speaking about pollinators ever since. And it works with me because I talk about the science of the garden and how you can do specific things related to science. What's in the publication that my grandfather told me years ago is absolutely confirmed, that if you can get more pollinators in your garden, you can grow about 30% more food.
Wow.
Yeah.
So your background is sciencey, which helps you when you want to understand what's going on. And so do you think your grandfather was like that too, or was he more just instinctive?
Yeah, so I think that gardening is instinct, right? I mean, we are scientists every day. We try stuff, and sometimes it works amazing, and sometimes it fails spectacularly. So we do a lot of experiments in the garden. My grandfather and my grandmother were very learned people. They loved to read. I love to read. All 12 of us went to college, so education was extremely important to them. So they were always trying new things. And I think this is one thing I've had to learn about myself is I hate to lose. That's probably because I grew up with brothers. And I used to feel like if I failed in the garden, I was a failure. And like, seed starting, it can be very good or it can be really bad. And this year, every year is so different, but this year has been so dry in the month of July. We've had hardly any rain at all. And why do some years the garden, like things are easy? Summertime and the living is easy. And then sometimes you just are like, this is insane. It's driving me crazy. But I will say I've learned that this is where I really am a huge fan of native plants because they're very forgiving. And so sometimes these extremes, those plants were born where you are, they're from where you are. So they're kind of used to our insane winters and late frost, and then they're okay with these hot, dry summers. So you might go out in the garden right now and be like, there's not a lot going on, but there's actually a ton going on. You just might not see it. It's going on underground where all those roots are, or those extensive root systems. So we're really excited to get some rain here so I can stop hand watering. I will say, this is not unusual anymore. Last year, it was the month of June. We didn't get any rain, which was terrifying because I had put in lots of pollinator gardens in that May time frame after that last frost, and then all of a sudden they cooked.
Yeah.
So I think this is one of the advantages of working with native plants that are specific for our pollinators is that they are very adapted to these wild swings in weather.
When you first started gardening, it was vegetables, right? Because that was the inspiration from your grandfather. But
Yes.
now, besides being a speaker, you are also a garden designer, and that is probably not vegetables if you're concentrating on natives, correct?
Most of my gardens that I install for clients are revolve around pollinators. So they can be something as small as like a pollinator strip for a vegetable garden, where we're actually trying on purpose to attract pollinators into the garden. We've done guilds in fruit orchards where we're purposely trying to feed the soil and attract pollinators. So we get lots of bees pollinating the trees, but also lots of good insects that eat the bad insects. I do this in my own orchard where we have an entire strip under those trees of herbs, flowers, and all different types of shelter for good insects. So I don't spray my trees. So you might not like that because the leaves aren't that pretty, but they're teeming with fruit at the moment. And that's because early in the spring, it was underplanted with cover crops. And that gave early food to the bees before those native plants and those herbs emerged and started feeding bees. So we will cover crop again this fall. And we chop and drop everything right under those trees. So they get a thick, thick layer of leaves in the fall from all of my surrounding woodland trees. And then that's the food and the cover for all of the insects that overwinter there. And then, this summer, you would just see it's full of wildflowers. It's just stunning. It's really stunning in any season because there's always something blooming under those trees, with exception of winter.
How does it work in terms of the shade that the fruit trees provide? And then what you're describing sounds like perennials or pollinator plants that love a lot of sun. How does that mix up? Is there just a wide gap between the trees?
So that's a great, great question. So yes, there are things that are shade and sun tolerant underneath there. And, as trees grow, the garden changes. We know that, right? So there are things that eventually will be pretty unhappy under those trees as they become fuller and larger, because the oldest tree I have at this year is 5 years. Everything else is younger than that. But I think that this is something that if you're really interested in learning, I encourage you to go. We're so, so fortunate to be surrounded by universities. And the Pollinator Institute is at Happy Valley in Pennsylvania, about an hour and a half from here in State College, where Professor Patch, who is a pollinator expert, I think he should be the next member of the Clue game, because can't you just see Professor Patch with the hoe
In the garden
in the conservatory, whatever.
with the very sharp shovel.
Yes, exactly. But he designed their arboretum with pollinators in mind. So they took all the research related to pollinators, and then he worked with a designer who then put into like groups or families the plants that would be happiest together. So like mesic versus wetland. And they've purposely put these trees in, knowing that eventually, as they leaf out, some of those plants are going to decline, and some of the new plants that prefer those habitats will emerge. And that's really, I would say, the lessons learned I've learned at being a pollinator garden and working on things like meadows is you can be in the same piece of dirt working on a meadow, and right over here it's dry, and then 3 feet later it's wet. And these plants are so adaptable in many cases that they can take occasional flooding, for example. So it's really helpful to understand like what will eventually will appreciate.
Your learning curve must be really fast if you were just a personal gardener who was just starting up 5 years ago with this orchard and stuff. Tell us how your garden evolved. What were the first things you put in vegetables, and then from there, how did it go?
So this house was originally a foreclosure, and my husband and I actually bought it on the airplane. Our realtor paid for it at an auction while we were flying home from our wedding. So it was a little bit of a secret garden. It had great bones. So lots of old mature trees. We back up to a little tiny creek. I'm fortunate to have a tiny woodland behind that, so I'm buffered from the neighbors. Can't see them except in the winter. But a lot of the plants had not been taken care of. So the first order in moving in this house really was just cleaning up the lot and understanding what I had because it was
Hmm.
covered in vines. There were dead trees that had to come down so they didn't fall in the house. So a lot of things were able to remain, but hardly anything, with the exception of the trees, were native. So what I have tried to do, I'm not a purist. My grandmother's peonies are happily coexisting with my
That's
native
awesome.
plants. But what I've tried to do is, as the landscape dies out because of its age, it's well over 20 years old at this point, we are replacing them with natives. And I just
Hmm.
find that's a lot less work for me because they tend to adapt and be adaptable to whatever Mother Nature decides to throw at it. So you're correct. I started with a vegetable garden first. It's what
Hmm.
I knew, right? And
Yeah.
then the pollinator garden definitely evolved. But I have a lot of downtime in the winter because once it's cold here, I do not garden. The ground is rock hard. So there's no option really other than my internal plants, which my husband starts to freak out because there's not a lot of room for him in the winter time because everything comes in. But the bottom line is that I do a lot of reading. So I'm constantly reading the newest, latest, greatest. I'm lucky I'm part of a professional garden speaking group called Garden Comps. So I get a lot of books sent to me to
Uh-huh.
review. And so I always have a stack of books ready to go for that downtime. This time of year, Leslie, it's tough for me to physically read because if I'm not in my office working, I'm in the garden. So I listen this time of year, podcasts like yours, and then books on tape through my library.
You can learn a lot that way. It's amazing. I always put it on pause when I'm thinking about where a plant might want to go. If it's a thinking part of my gardening process, I'm like, no, I cannot listen to somebody cracking jokes or talking about their gardening when I really like, I don't want to put these to still be in the wrong place. Like, you got to
Right.
think about this, colors and
Yes.
blooming and blah, blah. But there are a lot of mindless things in gardening, fun, mindless things, weeding, etc. Just tidying sometimes. And it's great to have people's voices in your ears
Yes.
teaching you something, or if you're in the mood to just sing along with, I don't know, Beyonce or something, that's all good too.
Yeah. Love it.
Absolutely. So what a steep learning curve. That is very cool. And the garden comp people can teach you a lot. All these authors can too. Oh, I know what I was going to ask you though. Does your husband is he like
Does he
mine where he's like,
garden?
okay, just do your thing. I will be waiting in here when you come in dirty, or does he garden at all?
He loves to tell people that he grows all these things, and his office staff laughs politely because they know he doesn't. But he loves to eat what's in the garden. And my husband is originally from India. He's a vegetarian, so a lot of things don't even make it out of the garden. He's literally, and I'm guilty of it too. We just stand out there and eat because everything is organic. We don't use any chemicals because I have all these lovely army of bugs to try to make sure that it keeps out the bad guys for us. We don't actually spray anything, and I have a genetically compromised pet, so I can't spray. So
Oh, well.
this has been a part of my learning curve too, because my husband and I have several other family members who suffer from different issues related to food. Growing organic was not initially designed for that reason, but it has become a huge part of our lifestyle because of what he can eat. And I'm grateful that I know how to grow my own food. I'm surrounded by farms that also helps. There's a lot of things related to how the soil has been treated over the years on farms. And so a lot of our food is, unfortunately, doesn't contain the same nutrients that it probably did back in our grandparents' day. The soil is very, very
Um,
depleted. Really difficult to get food that is nutrient dense.
right. Well, good for you that you're going for it. What percentage now of, obviously you put in fruit trees, but what percentage now of plants are just ornamental, or if they're not ornamental, you're growing them because you want to attract those pollinators? In other words, they're not food.
Yeah. What percentage is not food? The majority. I would say the traditional landscape is probably half at this point. And I would say, the pollinator garden is probably close to, I would say that food is probably only takes up about 10% of that. So maybe another 30% is pollinator plants
Okay.
at this point.
And when we say not food, we mean not food for you and your husband, but food
Yeah.
for others.
Food for insects, right?
That's right. Food for
And
insects and maybe
birds.
birds. So now you've branched off and you design for other people. It just do you travel to do that or just around where you are? Where in Pennsylvania are you?
I'm in central Pennsylvania, so the
Mhm.
majority of my clients are here, but I do word of mouth travels because this is obviously a specialized type of gardening. So I do have clients in North Carolina, where I'm originally from, and then I also have some down in Maryland as well. And what's really lovely about my current client group is they continue to expand their gardens. So I have more
Nice.
opportunity to work there. So we did a 10,000 square foot meadow this past summer, and that client wants to do two more. So I'm
Wow.
probably working on that property the rest of my life, but I'm really super excited. She says that she's never had this many birds. They have all kinds of butterflies. We're in season, we call 3 because this is the third summer. Sleep, Creep, Leap, we do a lot of plugs. So first year, they're really putting down roots. There's not usually a whole lot going on up top, but this is year 3 where the show, I think, is really starting when all the flowers are really coming. And it's just like a tapestry of color over there right now. So it's really just a treat to be there and to see all the visitors.
Had she previously grown grass in that area? So it's just such an amazing transformation in terms of habitat and food for bugs. Like, was it just turf grass? What was it before?
Great question. So in this particular case, there had been 2 gardens put in for a wedding of one of her children, and whatever was put there was not native, and there's no water.
Oh,
So it just slowly died out, and invasive type things moved in.
uh,
So it was about a 6-week process before we could put in the first plant, where we were actually killing everything that was there. And I don't, again, she doesn't want to use chemicals because she's got grandchildren. I don't like to use chemicals, as I don't think it's good for you. So we killed it with cardboard, and then
mhm.
we took the cardboard up, removed anything that was left. And then I am really super, super lucky. So we have an endangered butterfly here in Pennsylvania called a regal fritillary. It lives on Fort Indian Town Gap, which is one of the largest live fire training military sites in the world, which is on the next mountain from this property. And they have a prairie remnant. And in that prairie remnant is the perfect habitat for the regal fritillary.
Does it
So
have to do with the fires that are there?
exactly. So occasionally it catches on fire, so it burns the meadow down. So it does have to do with that, and it's also mostly grassland and wildflowers. So once a year they shut the base down. You have to apply for a pass. They only allow 300 people in a week to come out, but you actually tour the property with an entomologist or with someone who's an expert in these types of plants and plantings. And it's so cool, Leslie, because this butterfly actually emerges as a caterpillar right now. So mama lays the eggs on a very specific type of violet called the arrowleaf violet. Caterpillar emerges and it goes into these warm season grasses, and it's going to overwinter. And so that becomes the bassinet for the baby caterpillar, which
What's the
is
name of the caterpillar and butterfly again, please?
regal fritillary. So we have
Regal for
fritillaries in the United States, but this one is a regal. They call it the monarch dipped in chocolate.
Very cool. That's
Yeah.
awesome. And had you known about this type of butterfly before you started working with a particular client?
So I knew about the regals being at Fort Indian Town Gap, but because the passes are so limited, it's like a lottery to be able to get one. So as soon as they opened it up last year, my parents were coming to visit for my birthday. So we, immediately grabbed 3 passes. You have to do like a little quiz because you're on a military base. So like, don't walk off these lines because it is a live fire range.
Okay.
So long story short, when you come in, they give you a very nice pamphlet of all the different types of plants that are there. And then I took a ton of pictures and video, and you get to spend about an hour out with them. So I asked a ton of questions, and So I went to my client and said, I know you want to do these meadows. What if we did a meadow for this specific butterfly?
Uh-huh.
She said, let's go for it. So
Awesome.
then connected with all my growers. So I have growers that grow specifically for me because there's certain types of plants I want for certain types of properties. And so we started growing last fall, and then those went in this spring, and then some of them won't be ready till this fall. But we've put in thousands of plants over there for this particular butterfly. They're doing a collaboration with Zoo America to restore habitat for this particular butterfly. And long story short, it's very possible that we're going to be able to get them to release, because this property is going into a conservancy. They are releasing throughout Pennsylvania, but they're not telling people where because they don't want people to collect them.
Wow, that is so cool. We'll keep it a very big secret, but it's so neat that you're a part of it.
It's
That
cool.
is awesome.
I
And your
mean,
client must feel so good.
oh, well, she's loving it, and she actually helped. I mean, I could not have done this without her. So she helped plant plants. She loves to be out in the garden, so she was fantastic. And I love it when clients want to be in the garden with me because then I can teach them. And then they're like little joys, right? They're little things that happen, and you're like, you got to come see this. And then she does the same thing to me. She's like, never gonna believe you visited today.
Aw.
So that's kind of fun. Like you get like these little updates from clients of guess who came. So I'm happy that they're getting joy from the garden.
Yeah.
It makes me very happy. But people want to save the world. That's fantastic. I love to travel. And years ago in Iceland, we lost a iceberg. A whole glacier disappeared. What do you do about that? I have no idea. But one of the things I love to do is to plant plants that will help bring a butterfly back from the brink of extinction, and
Yeah.
plants that are extirpated in Pennsylvania, meaning they're so rare in nature that they're basically extinct. So some of my growers specialize in extirpated plants to Pennsylvania.
Wow. Can you name a couple of these plants?
Yeah, so one of my favorite one is called Rose Coreopsis. So you're probably familiar with Coreopsis, which is yellow. This one's pink. Looks like a cloud of cotton candy. It's so pretty. So that's one of my absolute favorites. The other one that we did a lot of in this meadow was fame flower. Actually looks like a succulent, which is really bizarre. But it
Flame
has
flower.
this
What's the botanical name? Do you know?
great
I can always
question.
look it up later.
The flower itself is just like delicate and tiny and beautiful. And when we put them in as plugs and they bloomed that year, I'm like, you're never going to believe this. And it was just this tiny, tiny, gorgeous little succulent looking plant that is basically extinct in Pennsylvania. And so I'm like, we're saving plants here, which is pretty cool.
That
Um,
is very cool. All right, I cheated and I just looked it up. Oh, that is so cool looking.
isn't
It's
that a
so
pretty?
bright red. I don't know how to say it, but it's tropeo. There's a diphthong involved. Tropaeolum speciosum. Does that sound right?
Sounds right.
They
Yeah.
also call it the flame nasturtium, which is interesting. Yeah.
Okay. That's kind of
So
cool.
good on you for helping to bring that back.
Yeah.
And do you now specialize in meadows, or would any sort of design for any sort of pollinator garden?
So this was a specific request for a client. So this was my first attempt at a meadow. And so again, spending a lot of time in the winter to study up on what are the plants we're going to use, how many they got to go in, how are we going to kill what's existing there, really learning. And what I love is she lets me experiment, so sometimes things work great, but we have a lot of deer pressure there. So sometimes things fail horribly, things that they shouldn't eat, they eat.
Oh man,
So,
that's terrible.
but that's okay. Good news is they don't typically rip things out of the ground, but we did use some deer preventer because these were plugs, and so they were pulling some of them up. So to keep that from happening, we needed them to get established. But they would come and eat the tops off the quinine, things like that. And I'm okay with that because I know it'll grow back. It's all right,
Yep.
but
Yeah.
yeah.
How did you keep it irrigated when they were just all tiny little plugs that could get thirsty very quickly?
Yeah, so we had to run some water out there. They have water for a vegetable garden that's adjacent to it, so we were able to tap into that. But the goal will be that once it's established, that we won't water it. I mean, ideally, after 2 years, pollinator gardens really shouldn't have to be watered. It doesn't mean
Hmm.
that you don't water them. Like in an extreme situation here, I always tell clients focus on trees and shrubs first, because obviously we want them to continue to bloom through the summer. They're crucial, crucial pieces of food because they've got thousands of flowers on them. But also too, that's where your investment is. If I lose a $3 plug, we're not going to cry about it, right? But
Yeah.
tree or shrub will get your attention sometimes.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It's interesting that in your business model, you continue to work with your clients, which I always did with. There was only one time where I ever designed a garden and then walked away. The woman kept calling me and to say, things like, well, doesn't that look sad? And I'm like, hard for me to understand why it looks sad if I'm not there watering. But it was so funny. I had these maternal feelings about it. And that must have been, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. And it was in a neighborhood that I don't frequent often. And I actually drove by it the other day. I'm like, wonder how that old garden is. But you continually work with your people also, but you don't do maintenance. You just continue to build habitat and pollinators. What do you do for
Yes.
clients?
Yeah, so typically it will start with one garden. So they may want to do like a small section and then they love it. So they're like, well, how about if we did it over here and then over here, right? So that's how it has started with a lot of clients where they want to just stick their toe in the water, which I applaud. Like even a pot on your porch, I think is a huge difference maker. And I think we should talk about that for fall because you can definitely make a pollinator difference regardless if you've got a big yard like I do or whether you've got just a pot on your porch. It makes a huge difference. In many of the cases, the clients have said, we love to be able to do this in our front yard, so a lot of times they'll start in the back because they're not sure how it's going to
Yeah.
work,
What's this going to look
maybe.
like? What are my neighbors going to say?
That's fine. That's fine. I'll take whatever they'll give me, right? Like
Right.
let's go for it. And then they're like, "Oh, this is really fun. Like let's do more of this." So, which is great.
That is very cool. It's also it's smart of them to start small. It's smart of them to start and back. It's a look that people need to sort of adjust to sometimes, and I hope that people are. How do you guide them if you're not doing the actual maintenance for them? How do you guide them in terms of maintenance? It's especially important now as we're coming up to fall. What do you tell your clients?
I mean, obviously the biggest thing is this time of year specifically, some of the seed heads start looking a little sad, right? So we don't have more flowers, but we've got seeds. And if you love birds, you want to leave those seed heads. And so it's really a mentality shift of the garden's not going to be perfect all the time. And here in Pennsylvania, people are neatniks. Like there's no leaves on the grass. And what I think is very interesting is they've sold more pollinator plants in the industry than ever before this past year. Most of my growers sell out. If I haven't put orders in early, I'm really taking a major chance that I won't be able to get what I want. And I think there is a movement of I really don't want this huge responsibility. The other thing I hear is I have kids, pets, grandkids, and I don't want to use chemicals. And
Hmm.
so if nothing is eating your garden, you don't have an organic garden. So we actually like relish when things are getting chomped on. And so I cleaned up a pollinator garden for clients. So they had done it, but it was kind of mishy-mashy where there was just
Uh-huh.
plants everywhere. And I think what people, they love the idea, but you want it to also look like it's intentional. So
Yes.
intentionality, but also it's easier for the pollinator to see it if there's more than one plant. Like we gathered up all the cone flowers, you know what I mean? And we kind of put them in groups. And so your eye kind of follows the garden that way, but it's easier for the birds to find it, the bugs to find it. But the husband came out at one point and he's like, so could you come look at our oak trees? There's all these black beetles on the oak tree. And I'm like, sure. So walk over there and it's actually covered in caterpillars. So I said, so do you see all those
And by the
bugs?
way,
Yeah.
do you find that it a little surprising that somebody would mix up the word beetle with caterpillar? They're quite different. Exoskeleton, squishy bits, whatever. Go on.
There's something on the plant. It's black. So we walk up. These oak trees are not very old, maybe 5, 10 years old. So I could still reach the limbs and pull them down. And essentially I'm like, do you hear all the birds right now? And he said, yes. I'm like, your wife loves birds? And he said, yes. I said, this is baby bird food. Like, don't do anything. This is exactly what's supposed to be happening to this oak tree. So oak trees can host over 400 different types of caterpillars. So when mama birds are flying through the neighborhood looking for where they're going to put their nest, they're going to put it near an oak tree because it's
Oh
like
yeah.
a smorgasbord.
Oh yeah. We're just going to set up house right here next to the supermarket, Whole Foods right here.
Yes, right, exactly. So this was what I would say is one of the downsides of being a pollinator gardener is that sometimes I go out and there's these fat, juicy, gorgeous caterpillars, and I'm so excited they're going to become butterflies. And I go out the next day and they're gone. And it's not because they're going to turn into a butterfly, only 1 in 10 do. It's that they were
They've
nature's
turned
hot
into
dog.
the circle of life.
Yes, the perfect amount of protein to be shoved down a baby bird's throat. They're very nice and soft.
So you're encouraging your clients to leave things up as best they can. I always found it a little bit difficult, especially with, say, I don't know, echinacea right in front of my house where I wanted to
Sure.
quickly and easily go back and cut more.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, you guys are sitting here really enjoying my flowers. I'm
Yes.
going to cut a few flowers and take them inside. Sorry, got a dinner table to decorate.
Yes.
More will grow back
Yes.
because I'm cutting and they come again. And then at some stage, I would leave them just for the
Yes.
seed look. But it's a look that we all have to get used to, isn't it?
It is. And what I encourage people to do is like if you live in a neighborhood where you're worried or you just don't like the unsightly, maybe you cut those seed heads like you talked about at the end of the season and put them behind your bushes that you're not going to see them or pile them in the back where no one else is going to notice, but it'll still be food for wildlife, which will become
Right.
really, really important as we move into the colder season where those fat sources are really important.
Yeah, they'll find that stuff. And so any gardener can be really thoughtful, a keyword, about fall cleanup and just getting their mind wrapped around leaving things as they are as best they can,
Sure.
but maybe not right by your front door because you got a neat Nick husband or you want it to look just so. But don't most of us have places around our yards that can be a little bit more feral and a sort of a changing a moving target in terms of the definition of what's feral in the garden, right?
Yes. Yes. And I mean, look, it's food for your plants, right? And here where I live, where it's so cold in the winter, it's actually shelter for the plants too, because sometimes, especially new plants, that first year have a tendency to want to heave on you, sometimes right out of where you planted them. So, I love to leave fall leaves in the beds when possible. I realize people don't want to leave them on their grass because they're worried it's going to smother the grass. So what we typically will do is my rule is if it falls on your property, leave it on your property. So we'll just pull it behind the shrubs where no one's going to see it. It's not going to bother anybody. We also have compost bins. So I always, this is going to sound terrible, but I have the guys who do my lawn because I do have some lawn, gather up my neighbor's leaves and we steal them and we put them in my compost bin.
Larceny in the neighborhood.
Our township, you push them to the road, and then I have the guys go get them.
and, until Heather's people come to get them. That's awesome. I heard you mention chop and drop. You also compost in bigger piles too, but you leave what you can in between plants.
Yeah, so especially things like borage is a dynamic soil accumulator. So not only do we add it to the compost bin, but we actually feed the trees with it. I will take my borage at the end of the season. I'll chop it all down. I have a nice big stinky brew of it brewing in the backyard at the moment because it's awesome food for the plants. And then I can use that as a concentrate, dilute it with water to feed plants. But everything else gets chopped and dropped. And that's true of whatever cover crop we put in on the vegetable beds as well as between the trees. So if there's any room left in the winter with the tree, with everything dying down under the trees, we will overseed it with typically I've used hairy vetch or I've used crimson clover. And not only is it stunning, absolutely stunning in the spring and the bees go gaga over it, it's dynamic soil accumulators. It's high nitrogen. So
Mm-hmm.
just chop it all down once it's done blooming and leave it right there. We just leave it
Perfect.
right there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You mentioned that people can have a pollinator garden even if they don't have a garden, that they could just, fill their pots with the correct stuff and maybe not mums. Talk to us a little bit about the best plants for fall.
Yeah, so I actually encourage people to go to National Wildlife Federation. They have worked in conjunction with Dr. Doug Tallamy. So you can just put your zip code in to their native plant finder, and it'll tell you the best plants for your zip code to host the most pollinators. So most of the time, it's going to be things like sunflowers that are native, asters, which are a fantastic fall addition to the garden, especially if you like mums. You're going to absolutely adore asters. They come in every color in the rainbow: blue, white, pink, purple, and yellow, and they can grow in sun or shade. So they're really gorgeous, gorgeous in a woodland garden, gorgeous to replace the fall mum, and wonderful for our fall migratory birds and butterflies. So one of my absolute favorites. And then also coming into fall, the other thing that a lot of people love to hate is goldenrod. So one of the challenges is that goldenrod is a fantastic fall plant, looks wonderful with the asters, but a lot of people will tell me, well, I can't plant it, I'm allergic to it. And in reality, they're not. It's just that it blooms at the same time as ragweed, which is wind pollinated. The asters are pollinator pollinated. And then we leave that standing because the goldenrods are the perfect bug hotels. So many of your bugs will drill holes into the stems, and then they'll overwinter in those stems. So we leave the goldenrod standing even after it's done.
A big stand of it looks beautiful. It has that arching yellow flower that fades out, but it still looks really lovely. A good big stand of it in fall. So those two, asters and the goldenrod or solidago, are really good plants. I moved in September to this very sterile HOA, and the only thing I had in front of my house was a small collection of Japanese azaleas and a lot of mulch. And those are the only two plants that I bought. I brought a bunch from home, but those were the two. And I just stuck them in between like the azaleas so they could poke up and say, hi, I'm part of the scene too, here in fall.
Oh, I love that that's what you brought. I don't know what I would bring. That's so great that you did that. I'm so proud of you.
No, I didn't bring those. Those were the two that I bought.
Oh, you
I
bought.
brought a lot of non-natives.
Okay.
Things that I couldn't, that I didn't know that I could get again, some more unusual plants. But I'm trying to up my native count in this new little garden because it was so strong in the last one because of my huge trees. And now I'm in a little bit of trouble, but I'm working on it. Hey Heather, you're such a great speaker, and you're on the circuit, you're out there. Tell us where people can go to hear you, either live or your social media stuff.
So I am on YouTube at Garden Thoughtfully. We put up action-based science content related to gardening every single week. So we'd love for you to join us on the conversation there. I do have on my gardenThoughtfully.com website my speaker schedule. We definitely need to get all the fall talks up. They're not there currently, but the next one coming up will be at the Horn Center in York, Pennsylvania. That's going to be a live demonstration. We'll be working with one of our local female growers, Calyx Nurseries, who actually grows at Horn Center. Then the Horn Center is hosting us to do some pollinator pots. So we're going to show people that they can actually choose. They'll leave with 3 plants that they choose from her collection to grow things for hummingbirds or butterflies or insects as they start migrating down to the South America and Mexico. This will be fuel for them. It was sold out last year, so it's a limited seating because we do it in the barn. It's a lot of fun, and I'm super proud to have this historic farm and be able to partner with such a conscientious grower. She grows a lot of those plants that we talked about that are so rare in nature that you can't necessarily find them at your local big box store.
Right. So you want to pay attention to where you can get them. GardenThoughtfully.com. And I can tell you from firsthand experience that Heather is a very captivating speaker, and she has a great message that we should all be listening to. Heather, thank you so much for chatting with me today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Leslie.
Yeah, good fun. All right. So I'll be back in a few minutes to talk about what might be going on in your garden right now.
That was such a nice chat with Heather. Oh, just an addendum to some information. She was talking about a native plant that she called fame flower, but I misunderstood her and I thought she was saying flame flower. And then I quickly looked it up while we were chatting, and the botanical name for flame flower I reported on correctly. Such a miracle. And it is indeed Tropiolum speciosum, not a native. The native she was talking about, called fame flower, is actually Femaranthus calicinus. And that's also called Tolinum calicinus. I don't know why they do that to us, but let me just take this opportunity to confuse both you and me further. Tolinum, to me, is that kind of cool lime green annual that people call jewel of Opar or something like that, and it self-seeds pretty prolifically. It's a useful plant because it can do full sun and it can tolerate shade. The flowers are kind of insignificant, but they do kind of look interesting as they're kind of hanging up on the skinny little strand that the plant pushes out from these sort of succulent lime green leaves. The little flowers are sort of orangey little balls just hanging out there. They're tiny. But anyway, back to the native fame flower. We're talking about Irene Cara fame, and that is the Femaranthus calicinus. I don't have any more intel on that than what Heather gave us. And if you recall, it sort of looks like a succulent and it's native. She was so pleased with it because it flowered so soon after planting small plugs. So that's pretty good information. What is going on in the garden right now in late August? Well, forget the garden. Let's talk about the computer and ordering bulbs. I just did it. Color Blends, my former sponsor, is my line of attack. I'll tell you what I got because I'm so excited. I got 100 of the pink cubed. So that's 3 different types of pink that bloom early, middle, late. And I got 100 of the white cubed. Same idea. I'll mix them up together and I'll have this smattering of pink and white for like quite a few weeks. It's clever, huh? It should be a decent display. And I'm going to plant those in front to entertain people walking by. A lot of people take walks in my neighborhood. And then for the bowling alley in back, the secret garden that nobody can see except me. And that's good because I never asked permission to change it from grass to what it is now. Shh. I just got 100 of a bunch of different tiny bulbs. The following things: crocuses, 2 different squills, blue and that really light blue and white kind of stripy one, iris reticulata, and anemone. So my plan will be to mix all of those bulbs up together in one trug and plant little handfuls of, random bits of them all up and down the bowling alley to make me and maybe some pollinators happy in very early spring. I've been noticing a hummingbird in my pathetic little non-pollinator garden, and the only thing I can see it actually making use of is my Verbena bonariensis. But since it's willing to come and visit me with so little to choose from, I'm just determined to get a bigger variety of plants around here that could serve him or her. If you listen regularly, I moved away from a very large garden about a year ago now. I wonder what the new owner would say if I just sent a text to her. She's really nice. I would text her and say, I'm just not sure that you're tracking that we gardeners have a certain set of skills. It's actually kind of magic. We can walk through a garden with a sharp soil knife and a small plastic bag, and we can take away little bits of plants, any plant, particularly ones that you might have too much of, and you'll never even know we were there, right? We're that good, right? I'm thinking I might want to send her that text because there's just some things that I miss. My hyacinth bean vines are going bananas and softening up the top of my pretty harsh concrete retaining wall, so that was a good plan for this summer. I need a more permanent solution, I think, and so maybe I let some of that ivy grow back, but keep it controlled. I'm not quite sure. It's English ivy. I wouldn't let it go to flower, so it couldn't invade wild spaces if I were to do that. So take that off your list of worries. Mixed in with the hyacinth bean vines are a few moonflower vines, and I'm beginning to see that magic at night. It's kind of cool how the white marble that I laid down over where the grass was, and any white flowers, but particularly, those 4 or 5 inch moonflower flowers, really light it up at night. If you're not familiar with the moonflower vine, it's one of the easiest annual vines to grow. Simply plant it like Jack of the Beanstalk would magic beans. Plant it where you might have a cocktail or an early morning coffee, or in my case, just someplace where you're glancing out of your window as you're putting on your PJs. They are such a pleasure. It's kind of a quiet time in some perennial gardens, and particularly mine, because I hardly grow anything yet. It's just been a year. I have big plans, though. My go-to at this time of year would be more Phlox paniculata, but I only grow one type now, and it's the fabulously early, that's not right. It's the fashionably early crystal white paniculata. And it's great, but it kind of poops out by now, where the other regular, more native-y paniculatas, I mean, they're all cultivars, but anyway, I would go to Gina, the pink, or David, the white, and they would normally see me through the season. Let's see, where can I get those two plants? Well, my old garden, that's where. And she would never know. But like I said, I would get permission to do any excavation that she would never see. We'll see if I can pull this off sometime this fall. So next time on Into the Garden with Leslie, Marianne Wilburn and I are going to talk about, well, you know, when Marianne and I talk, we kind of go all over the garden, but we'll talk about my visit to her garden. And also one other particular topic is a little kerfuffle that happened on Garden Rant recently about people who are quite strict about native plants. So, you know, even just by listening to this one episode, if this is your first, that I am not one of those people. I'm a fan, but I am not strict. And I have no problem with the people who are strict, except if they want to tell me what to do, because guess what? It's my garden. I have authority problems. Marianne and I talk about the reactions to a blog post that she wrote on the topic, and it's kind of interesting. In the meantime, before you listen to that, get out into your garden, order your bulbs, generally go sniff the roses, which are starting to bud up for me because of our cool nights. You know, they take that little break in summer, like, oh yeah, May is cool. June and July, August, not so great. But now they're starting to get some buds. You know, I only grow 3 of them in this tiny place, 2 that I inherited with pretty horrendous colors, and one that I bought, a creamy white David Austin. And that's the one that I'm seeing buds on more than the other 2. And that's the one that I'm excited about. I hope you're excited about your garden. I'll be back in a week or 2 or 3. It's a casual podcast produced by a lazy podcaster. But thanks for listening.